And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the FIDE Grand Swiss has started, and therefore you can also see I'm in some formal attire just for this special occasion. I'm sure that there is going to be a lot of content out there about the Grand Swiss. For those of you who don't know about the tournament, it's currently taking place in Uzbekistan, and the players fight out some of the candidates' spots there, and basically all of the top players, except for Magnus and a few others, are not participating. But apart from that, the tournament is super strong. I think there's sort of a rule that only the top 100 players can play, and if some of them drop out, then the list just goes on. And there are a couple of wildcards, which actually already brings me to the video. Today we are checking out a game between Divya Deshmukh and her coach, actually, Puranik Abhimanyu, who was the second of her for quite a few tournaments, if I'm informed correctly. But let's just go back briefly to what I was saying, which is that for this tournament, I'm planning to sort of film some highlights of each day, which I guess there are going to be a couple of videos about that. But I'm mostly focusing also on the preparation aspect of the players, since the Grand Swiss is such an important tournament that all of the players come super well prepared. I thought it would be nice to go through sort of the top novelties of each day, or at least one of them. And here Divya, so it was round number one, Divya had, who is by the way playing in the open section, which I should also call out. She was one of the very well-deserved wildcards. And in the opening, she played this line with bishop f4, which she has already played a couple of times before. So it reached the position with d4, c4, and just this type of cast, but now with bishop f4. And actually the line is quite interesting. I played it with white once and checked it on numerous occasions. It's sort of just a way to kind of get a game with less theory than in the main line with bishop g5, of course. And the positions tend to be quite interesting here as well. Divya had a couple of games already, as I was saying. I just wanted to show what she had before in her games. Puranik played bishop f5. He was pretty well prepared, I think, up until some moment. She had also a game in bishop e7, then e3, bishop f5, and in general the bishop would be sort of well placed on f4 if white gets bishop d3, avoiding bishop f5. But black should try to get out the bishop. But there are some immediate ways for white to make use of that. For example, here in this move order, queen b3 is possible because black hasn't played c6 yet, and he's not able to play queen b6. So knight c6 was played in one of her games against another Indian player, I'm now just seeing, and she went g4, which is quite a typical idea in this line. And here she was better, but in the end lost the game against Bharat Subramanian, I think it was, also in 2025. She had also two games in bishop d6. Here the idea is just to play with e3 and then trying to get sort of a good call spot with bishop d3, for example, like this. Often an idea would be h3 to play knight f3 next without allowing bishop g4, which should be a bit more pleasant for white, or also the move knight e2, of course, is possible here as well, later on to try and get this type of f3 followed by e4 play. So typically bishop f5 is the move which black wants to make, because now after bishop d3 he is able to trade those two bishops, and the bishop on c8 is generally the worst bishop of if you compare those two bishops with each other. And she had two games. One of them went queen f3, bishop g4, queen g3, which is another nice idea I wanted to point out. Her opponent played queen b4. This was also in 2025 against Richard Stahlmach from the Czech Republic. Rook b1, castle, bishop d3 with unclear play. Later on, she was able to win that game. The queen on the king side in those type of positions, if the dark squared bishop is exchanged already, is actually quite useful, because white often is able to start an attack or an initiative on the king side. She also played knight e2 in another game, and after castle knight g3, I would say that this is probably sort of the main line now here, this exact line with bishop d6. And her opponent, Shuvalova, played the move bishop e4 here. This was in the FIDE Grand Prix in India, also 2025. And here she was a bit better, meaning Divya with white. Just castle came on the next move, and black's pawn structure is a little bit vulnerable, especially the pawn on the c-file, and white can later on line up there. Bishop e4 is a bit inaccurate, however. Black should go bishop g6, and then after h4 the position is unbalanced, but definitely interesting for white, because black now has to make a decision if he wants to keep the bishop of getting trapped with either h5 or h6. Otherwise, white would cause some trouble with h5 to come. So all of this has been played already. I believe that in many of the games we would get something like c6 and then bishop d6 as well. Like this is what typically happens in this line, and then white is just a tad bit better. Like most of the games go like this. I think the best for black, just to conclude it here, is probably to go for c5 and then some positions like this. I think I was seeing some game by Magnus. It went something along those lines against Kramnik it was. And generally those positions are not really anything special for white, but yeah, I would need to look into that a little bit further, but maybe there are some other ways to play, like maybe dc5 here, or bishop b5, e3, and then something else. Like what would be another idea is here to take with the queen, perhaps, might be possible too. But c5 is, I think, the best for black here. Puranik played bishop f5, e3, c6, which is of course also a very decent line, because now after bishop d3 again, black would get exactly what he would like. I'm just saying that c5 is probably a little bit easier in my opinion, because here it can get quite sharp, as it happened in their game. Divya here went for the move f3, which was completely new to me, and that's why I also wanted to make this video, because it's quite an interesting option for white, and black needs to be actually quite careful not to get into trouble, and Puranik actually did in the game. Which I thought was quite funny, because I guessed that the two of them worked on this line together. So I wonder what was like the dynamic between them, that coach plays against the student in this case, and they go for a line, which they've analyzed. Often those scenarios do occur if someone is seconding someone else. So after f3, of course, white is trying to get in g4. That's kind of the main idea. And black typically goes bishop d6 in this position, but after g4, those positions are surprisingly dangerous for black. Like I was clicking around a little bit in those lines, and at first it looked to me like white is a little bit overextended on the king side, and black can make use of that by bringing the knight to f5 in some case, but the computer really likes those positions. Now knight g3, and if knight f5, this was the line I was looking at. King f2 later on, I think, as well. It was not here with king f2. Yeah, here it was knight e2, and only with this maneuver, white has quite a considerable advantage here. Even it was quite a lot. And now knight g3, king f2 is coming, and the bishop on f5 is a little bit awkward. Also, the pawn on h5 is sort of a long-term weakness, and now this king is also in a bit of trouble, because it would much rather be on g8, I would assume, being castled. So I found those positions pretty interesting and also hard to understand at the first sight, at least. I also looked at bishop g6 here, h4, h5, g5. And if knight g8, I mean, here I can understand that white should be a bit better, because we're able to put the knight to f4. I was just having a pretty hard time in those positions, trying to understand them. But at the end of the lines, it sort of all of made sense. This was my analysis here after knight g3, and then white does have some ideas like bishop h3 and f5. And white's center is also quite stable, and black will have a pretty hard time getting counterplay with c5, because then the pawn on d5 could also become weak. But of course, this is sort of probably the best way for black to try and find counterplay anyway. The game followed knight h5, which is the best according to the computer. So that's why I'm saying probably Puranik was familiar with this line after all. But it does initiate sort of a very forcing line. So white takes on b8, goes g4. Now, well, the piece is gonna fall off the board if black doesn't do anything quickly. So queen h4 check, king d2, and now knight g3. This is all forced. The point being that if white takes on g3, then at the end, black can pick up the other knight on g1 and has a lot of is up a lot of material. So g takes f was played, knight takes h1, knight h3, and now we have quite a curious situation that the knight on h1 is sort of trapped, and if white can gain that back and solidify, then he would be just much better, like in a game. And also knight f2 shouldn't work because of queen e1, and then black is gonna lose the knight anyway because of the pin. So Puranik immediately went wrong now. I guess that his preparation concluded somewhere around here, and he went for bishop d6, which is an extremely logical move here. So I think that almost everyone would go wrong somewhere along these lines. I would have gone wrong a couple of moves earlier already. The best, however, is bishop b4, but still it was very difficult for black. Like this was one line which I looked at, bishop g2, short castle, a3, kicking back the bishop, the knight on h1 is going to fall anyway. And in this position here, looks quite similar to the game, but now black all of a sudden gets counterplay with b5. Actually, I think that this might be sort of one of the only differences compared to the game, that here black is in time to get counterplay with b4 to come, because white has played a3 already. So that's kind of the main point of including bishop b4. Of course, extremely deep and almost impossible to understand. So this was played in the game, rook fe8, and yeah, now f4 would have actually been a lot better to what happened in the game. Divya played rook e1, and that would have given black the chance to get a lot of counterplay in the center with c5, so therefore f4 would have been better. In general, in those positions, like I checked it in another line, it was 2 moves later, so here after rook d8, again f4 would have been best, and c5 at first might look a little bit scary, but white has this idea to keep everything closed with e4. And the king on d2, of course, looks quite weak and doesn't have many defenders, but also black doesn't really get any of his attackers to near the king. So that's kind of the main problem, and therefore white is much better in this position, objectively speaking, of course. Practically, probably anything could happen. Yeah, here I was about to skip some of the moves because it was just pretty complicated. Again, f4 was the best, just opening up the bishop on g2 as well. Let's go through the moves a little bit more quickly. So there were a lot of chances for both sides. For example, here bishop f1 would have been stronger than queen c2, which was played because this allows the queen to sort of get a bit annoying on this diagonal towards f1. So therefore bishop f1 would have been strong, but I guess that also both of them have been in time trouble here already. So of course it's extremely difficult. And Divya was most of the part actually a lot better and had significant winning chances. But the turning point came then somewhere around here. And after queen g5, now she played queen g2, which is probably not entirely necessary. The computer gives bc3 and then just king c2, and maybe even picking up the pawn on c3 at some moment, which of course is also quite risky because all of the dark squares are going to be quite weak. But here at least, according to the computer, white is winning. Instead, queen g2 was played, and somewhere around here it started to go wrong. Queen g3, now sort of going into the wrong direction here. King takes b2 was necessary here as well, but I would also be quite scared with some checks on f6, for example. But actually the final chance was here already in the endgame. So black was able to exchange queens, which at least here surely favors him, because otherwise black's king could be a bit more in trouble, especially if the minor pieces get active. Otherwise, of course, the white king on b1 is also not fully safe. However, here she needed to play rook h8 check and then trade here and then take on a5, and apparently this endgame should be a draw, but of course black still is the one who is pushing here. For example, if king takes b2, I was looking at rook d2 check and then rook f2 came, and probably the pawn on f3 would fall. So this was getting quite close. I think that's what the computer wanted, knight c4 or knight c6 here, with pretty good drawing chances. But in the game, she took on a5 immediately with the rook, and after bishop c5, this rook on a5 was sort of cut off, and on top of that, white's king is now also a little bit weak. And generally, the pieces are not coordinated well. Here, king b3, of course, would be the move which white wants to make, but after rook c3, it's just losing material. So king b1, rook e8, rook d5, and rook f2, and here white resigned because either e3 is falling or f1 is falling or anything, just or f3. So yeah, that was the recap of today. Again, I think it was quite an interesting game, both looking at the opening side of the game and also later on. Especially I was quite amazed, I might even say, about the finesses of those positions, because yeah, first time I looked at it, it did look a little bit risky, but it's certainly an area which can be investigated for white. Generally, the line with bishop f4 is catching up. Many more players are playing it, so it's certainly a good idea to be aware of it. And apart from that, I am saying thank you for watching. Let me know if you enjoy this this series, if you want to see more videos about the Grand Swiss like this. Also, one other thing, if you have come this far, you can try to guess who I am helping at the Grand Swiss, because I am also working as a second, but this time from home. I'm not there this time. But anyway, you can drop your guesses in the comments. I'm curious what you guys are going to come up with. So thank you guys for watching, and I'm going to see you guys soon.